Welcome back to Purrfect Takes. On this week's episode, I'm your host, Stephen Patton, joined by my co host, Jacob Acquire. We're going to be going over some current Panthers news. A lot has been going on in terms of the voting on the new stadium ordeal. Dates have been released for training camp. Our preseason opponents have been announced in terms of where we're playing, what times. And so we'll get all into that. How you been?
Pretty good. The Elden Ring DLC came out. Pretty popular PC video game, so I played that all weekend. But other than that, I'm locked in and ready to go today.
Yeah, some good bosses from what I've seen on Twitter and heard from you even. So good stuff there. I guess the first thing we can jump into with the Panthers is the training camp dates have been announced. We're looking to go probably July 27th. It's a Saturday. It'll be at Bank of America. Should be a lot of fun, but they usually have it's like Thursday to Friday, Thursday to Saturday kind of gig for several weeks, which is really cool. And that the fact that you're going to have reporters and fans being able to see how the team's coming together in terms of the practice and the drills.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to not having to drive all the way to Spartanburg to go this year. It'd just be like 15 minutes down, a little more than that, like 20 minutes down the road to the stadium. But that should be fun. And then you do have the one preseason game kind of sprinkled in between preseason or in between training camp dates. Excuse me. First one's going to be at New England. We all know about the New England preseason stuff with Matt. I think Matt Corral and Cam both had foot injuries at New England, and then we are hosting the Jets again. We remember what happened with the Jets last year with them just terrorizing our offensive line. Should have been a sign. And then we go to Buffalo for the final one. So three AFC East teams. And I believe it was here against Buffalo, I believe, where Sam Darnold sprained his ankle the year we traded for Baker. So all three of these teams have some bad preseason history for us. But hopefully no injuries. We go into the season clean. But yeah, those are the training camp dates. It starts on July 24th. It'll end August 15th with a joint practice with the Jets. But yeah, those are the preseason dates for this season. It's coming up. The summer is going faster than I thought it would. And pretty soon here, we're going to be having college football in about 55-ish days, something like that. So can't get
That's
here
pretty
soon
crazy.
enough.
Yeah, and to touch on some of the dates you pointed out and even preseason, what I think will be interesting is we did a lot this offseason to bolster the interior offensive line. We're going up against the Patriots, who just extended Christian Barmore. You have Big Q and some of the other defensive line pieces on that Jets D line, including if he shows up to some of these training camps once they become kind of mandatory, Hassan Reddick, who used to be a Carolina Panther. So that'll be interesting. Buffalo has some good pieces with Ed Oliver and Gregory Rousseau. And I think that'll be a good test. And I think the other thing to
Yeah.
keep an eye on for in the preseason is last year, we saw a lot of 11 personnel, like almost like 90% of the snaps. And we were like wondering, okay, are they kind of hiding what we're doing in these other personnel packages? And it turned out we had no diversity for
Nope.
most of the
Yeah.
season. So I'm very curious to see, especially with a very young coaching staff. I would say fairly inexperienced in terms of the head coaching realm. And with that, I'm worried about, okay, is there going to be a difference between preseason and the regular season? If we see some of the struggles in the preseason, is that just going to kind of trickle in to the regular season? So just things to kind of keep an eye for, trends that we saw last year going into this year. We'll talk more about it, obviously, as we approach the season. South Carolina obviously isn't getting a lot of love since we're not in Spartanburg with training camp this year, but there will be a fan fest in Clemson. And I think we briefly touched on it, but the stadium renovations passed last night. That was a big ordeal. Some of the arguments I heard, both for and against it, I don't think were very solid. From an economic standpoint, when I was at UNC Charlotte, I had a couple classes with professors who did some of the research on this. And as much money as it seems like a team brings a city, it's not really economically beneficial. And so that's why
Right.
we've seen cities like Oakland take a more like, okay, we're just going to take an economic route on this. We'll let all these teams walk unless you guys want to be cheapskates. And so that's kind of how Oakland has lost the football team over the past couple of years. St. Louis lost one as well. And so
Oakland
you
lost
wonder,
their baseball team as well
yeah.
recently, like this past year.
So
But
and that's crazy. But yeah, it's some of those things that like I don't know the arguments being made, I don't think were the best ones in front of city council.
I'm with you there. To your point, I actually did in my first econ class with Dr. Amato, who we're both big fans of. I actually did a project about this exact topic with its bringing a team to a new city. When the team first arrives, there's a huge economic boom, but ever since then, it's a steady decline, especially with renovations and stuff like that. So, as far as the people who voted against it, I kind of understand the hey, this proposal is rushed. There's not a lot of groundwork. There's not a future tether to the city longer than like 10, 15 years. So I understand that. But as far as like a market goes, I don't think there's a bigger market for football for an NFL team, frankly, than Charlotte and the Carolinas. So I'm not too concerned about the team moving or anything like that. It's going to be interesting. I think once the renovations start in 2026, I don't like I wonder how it's going to work in the season, right? Because it's going to take longer than a summer to
Yeah.
install some of the stuff that they were looking at. So, like, are we going to go play some games in Clemson again, like we did in our first season? Are we going to have a lot of away? Like, are we going to have a big stretch of away games? So there's going to be time to focus on specific parts, like the foundations and the bones of the stadium. But should be interesting. Again, that starts in 2026, so still a couple seasons removed from when that's going to happen. But it's exciting the renditions and the or renders rather of the new stadium look pretty cool, like with the big electronic board on the outside and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, it seems like it's going to be really cool once they're all done. Like you said, there's not a lot of tethers. This does feel a little rushed, and we've seen some of these projects that David Tepper has kind of invested in with the Carolinas kind of fall flat. And so, again, a lot of valid concerns on that front. I don't think the economic concerns were truly as emphasized as best as they could
Yeah,
have been. And that's just something that, like, obviously is going to happen when you have like a general forum and anybody from the public can kind of get up and make claims and statements. So that we've kind of gone on a side tangent, but it's one of those things that, again, we aren't fully in support of. Like, we are in support of the team staying in Carolina. We're both very excited about that.
yeah,
Like you said, it's one of the bigger cities in the country, and it deserves, I believe, an NFL franchise, and that's not going to change. But if you're trying to make an argument that this is going to benefit businesses better in the long run than if the team were to leave, I don't think that's supported by evidence. And that's more just our point here. So, with that being said, the around the NFL, there's really nothing been going on. We talked about
nothing.
Brandon Ayuk last week. There is still some rumors that he might get traded to Washington. He's apparently his camp is making a push for that. We might see some bigger trades kind of unravel based on teams signing the players signing their franchise tags and not. So T. Higgins could get moved in the next couple of weeks. It's some big names to kind of keep an eye on, but nothing big news on that front.
If you remember, before Debo got his extension in San Francisco, he had requested a trade that summer as well. And so it took
Yep.
him a little time to work it out, but they finally worked it out. From the reporting, I think it was from Ari Meroff on Twitter. I think the camp or Ayuk's camp said that in terms of a trade, San Francisco was looking at him like he's worth a first round pick and more. But when it came to the extension, they were viewing him as a high end number two receiver. So there's
Mm-hmm.
clearly a little bit of dissonance there, but there's not really much Ayuk can do really because on his fifth year, and then they could tag him the next year. So hopefully they get an extension done. Well, hopefully they trade him to the Panthers, but and for Ayuk's sake, hopefully they can get a good extension done for what he's worth, which is that 30 million number, maybe like 31 or something like that.
Yeah, he could be pushing the AJ Brown 32 million. He's young enough, and what he's shown on the field, I think, is ample enough from a film standpoint of just showing that he can be that guy and another offense. So whether it's San Francisco or another team this fall, that's a guy to kind of keep an eye on. But that really does it for around the NFL. So now we're into a segment that it's kind of uncharted waters. Most every other position that we've talked about, there's a way to sometimes quantify the value of a quarterback, of a wide receiver, of an offensive line, of a defensive lineman, of a guy in coverage or a guy who's able to come up and make tackles. But now we're talking about the head coaches, the guys kind of calling the shots, the guys that are pretty much building the coaching staffs and making sure that everybody is on the same page. And we've seen so much this offseason now with Bill Belichick and Tom Brady out of football of them talking about just how cohesive they were as a team and as a unit and how important it is for the head coach to kind of be the captain of that. I mean, you are the head guy at this point. It's you and the GM when it comes to building this team. We've seen a lot of the Panthers blueprint stuff talking about like Dave Canales and Dan Morgan's relationship, and that matters. So I think the guys that we're going to talk about today are the guys that we see as the best guys that we would want to build a franchise around. And we'll give our reasons for and against. There's definitely some surprise names. And without further ado, you want to kind of kick it off, Jacob?
Yeah, so when I made this list, and you're talking about different kinds of criteria and stuff to kind of rank them, do whatever you will with that. I kind of looked at like overall records, like their winning percentage, their playoff records, the amount of losing seasons, postseason success, and then top 10 scoring offense and defense. I thought that was important as well because while a lot of these guys are play callers, right? We have, just a spoiler, both of us, number one, have Andy Reid. I think that's pretty self explanatory. He's not calling the defense, but he is in charge of the entire team, right? He needs to bring in a guy like Spagnuolo. He needs to spend some time in the defensive meeting rooms and stuff like that. So I think that's kind of important here. And getting right into that, I don't think anybody can argue that Andy Reid isn't the best coach in the league right now. He's been coaching for 25 years now, 11 with Kansas City. And with Kansas City, he has a 71.5% win percentage, 130 and 93 in the regular season, 16 and 7 in the playoffs, zero losing seasons with the Chiefs. The only time they didn't get a 10-win season was in 2014. I believe that was that year where the Chiefs went on like a 15, or maybe it was more than 15 game stretch where they didn't throw a touchdown to a wide receiver. I
Mm-hmm.
think that was that year, if I recall correctly, Alex Smith year. But other than that, they've been 10 or more wins, lights out. Three Super Bowl rings, obviously, all coming in the Mahomes era, four appearances. And since taking over for Kansas City, he's only been outside the top 10 in scoring offense. So that's like the amount of points you score in a season three times. So 8 out of 11 years, top 10 scoring offense. Same with the defense, eight top 10 scoring defenses. So as far as a resume goes, he's really good there. Like with the counting stats and wins like that. But what sets Andy Reid apart for me is his red zone play design. He's the most creative red zone guy I think I've ever seen. Like even in the regular season, he breaks out some really nutty stuff. Where I can remember, I think it was 2 years ago now, where they lined up in like a carousel and the huddle and just spun around. I think it was against the Raiders,
It
and
was
they're just
against the
like,
Raiders.
there's the players are like sitting there like, huh, what is this? And then they all get to their spot and run the play, and it was a touchdown. So just really creative stuff there. Best coach in the league. And if you want to talk coaching trees, I know you're a big coach tree guy. You've done a couple projects on that. So I think out of all the modern coaches, that's not to, or that's like excluding Parcells and all the older ones. Of all the modern coaches, the best tree by far.
Yeah. Three out of my top 10 coaches, I'd have to go through your list and count again and make sure. But they come from it's Andy Reid and then two of his disciples. And it's really cool to kind of look at the numbers. Andy Reid was extremely successful with the Philadelphia Eagles when you look at his coaching staff and who was a part of that in the early 2000s. A lot of those guys became head coaches. Whether it's like Brad Childress on the offense, you had Ron Rivera, Sean McDermott, John Harbaugh, some of these bigger names like come from his coaching tree that went on to win big games with other teams and leave a legacy there. And it's really cool to see just his impact on the NFL since becoming a head coach, I believe, in 1999, going from the Philadelphia Eagles, kind of taking them to heights they had never been in their franchise's history. And then again with Kansas City, I mean, this team was coming off one of the worst seasons when he took over, and he turned them into pretty much a perennial playoff team. And then when they drafted Mahomes, a Super Bowl contender. And when you look at guys like Bill Belichick and Pete Carroll, two of the better coaches of the past like decade or so prior to them retiring this past year, they were in their 60s. And Andy Reid is in his 60s. So I really think his shelf life, even if he has Mahomes and whatnot, it's like once you start hitting that 70 plateau and managing the team the way he is and doing it in the manner in which he has done it, I think it becomes a little bit harder. And so maybe that's where Steve Spagnuolo takes over the team, then kind of like what Todd Bowles did with Bruce Arians. Maybe they're able to get a guy like Ben Johnson in a couple years if he stays put and he's waiting for an opportunity like that. But for the time being, he's the best, simply put. It doesn't matter how you look at it. He's top 10 in a lot of metrics, whether it's in-game decision making, whether it's play calling, whether it's, like you said, some of these offensive metrics. There are some mixed effects models that pretty much try to pull and separate the coaches impact on the game in terms of a spread. And Andy Reid is top two right now in the NFL in that metric. So when you look at those numbers, it's hard to say he isn't the best. It's after number one that things get shaky. You start going, okay, who's been the Super Bowls? Who's designed not only a good offensive, their offensive play caller, been able to keep a cohesive unit on both sides of the ball, no matter the kind of roster turnover. So who do you have at number two? I think this is where we're going to start getting into the Shanahan trees, and we're going to see them kind of sprinkled throughout this list.
Yeah, you don't think Matt Nagy is going to be the one to replace Andy Reid there? You don't think it's going to be
I mean,
him?
maybe. But would you take Matt Nagy over Steve Spagnuolo? Because I think what Spagnuolo has done over the past couple years, because he wasn't with the Chiefs initially when Andy
Right.
Reid took over. He came back, and then their defense flipped a switch, and that is what's helped them and propelled them to their past two Super Bowl wins.
Well, yeah, it's hard not to pick Spags there. I was just making a little joke, but in the research for this, I was looking up the AP Coach of the Year for like the last 10 years or so. Matt Nagy won it one of the years when the Bears went 12-4. So I don't know. He has an accolade next to his name, so who knows? But like you said, after Andy Reid, it gets murky, right? The way I did it was all 10 of my coaches are competitive. So you can't look at it from oh, their team is competitive. So Super Bowl winners. People have been to Super Bowls. And of those Super Bowl winners, we have a couple who it's been quite a while. They're still able to keep their team competitive throughout the stretch. So for me, number two is going to be Sean McVay. And just to go down all the like the numbers and stuff, 60.9 win percentage, 7-4 playoff record. He also only has one losing season during his tenure, and it was actually 2022, so 2 years ago. And that was when Stafford's elbow was like just cooked for the entire year, coming off of that Super Bowl run. He was getting banged up in that Super Bowl run. Really long time to recover, but you can see this year when he was healthy how effective that offense was. They still managed 5 wins that year with like Baker, John Wolford. They had like a Carson Wentz, I think, was on the team too, or maybe he was last year. Bunch of different mid-level QBs. Consistently, he's never had a first-round pick to draft elite young talent outside of. Well, he wasn't there when Goff was drafted, but had him. In lieu of that, they bring in veteran talent that's elite, but never had the young guys to really build with. He has two Super Bowl appearances, obviously one win, and of the end of the Brady era into the Mahomes era. So I'm calling that when Mahomes was a starter, became a starter. There's only three coaches to, or rather three important people to win a Super Bowl. One's Tom Brady. He won it Mahomes' first year against Sean McVay, and then he won it again against Mahomes. Two is Mahomes and Andy Reid. They've won it 3 times. And the third person is Sean McVay. He's the only outside coach here to win in this Brady Mahomes era. And obviously, it wasn't against either of them in that Super Bowl, but it was against a Bengals team that was surging and was really hot that year. Top 10 scoring offense 4 out of 7 years. Top 10 scoring defense only once. So where he did have Aaron Donald, who's probably one of the better defenders ever, the rest of the defense didn't shore up and keep other teams out of the end zone as much as you would think, despite the elite talent between him, bringing in Ramsey, and then even on the Super Bowl runs, they had guys like Ndamukong Suh who were on, I guess, more of the tail end of their careers or the downturn of their careers, but still big name value there. And I think what's important about him is aside from breaking into the Mahomes and the end of the Brady era. I think Kyle Shanahan gets a lot of credit for the boom of the new offensive play callers, but I think Sean McVay has had an equal amount to do with that, especially looking at his coaching tree, where you have guys like Matt LaFleur, who also worked under Shanahan in Atlanta, but he was McVay's offensive coordinator before going to the Titans and then subsequently being hired. We'll talk about LaFleur here in a second. Kevin O'Connell, offensive coordinator, goes to the Vikings 13-4 his first year. Good start there. And Zach Taylor, who led his team to a Super Bowl berth against Sean McVay, against his mentor in his second year there. So all that, like I guess, compiled and put together, I think of all the younger Super Bowl winners, I don't want to say younger, I say like more recently, Andy Reid, McVay. I think he's the one that stands above the rest. You can put Arians in there too, but he is no longer coaching, so can't put him on the list.
So I think when we have the conversation about McVay, a couple of things got to come up. One is that Les Snead's gambles And
Mhm.
obviously, McVay is a part of those gambles. When we talked about this at the top, that is a marriage between head coach and GM where they have to have the same vision and they have to follow through on it. But trading for Von Miller, getting edge rushers like Leonard Floyd and Clay Matthews, Ndamukong Suh for some of these Super Bowl runs, knowing they had to soup up the defensive line. They had very healthy offensive lines. That is a staple in McVay's offense that allows him to run some of the pass and run options that he has. And not so much the run pass options, but the play action off of it. Okay, we're
Mhm.
showing you run. We want to get you into like a cover three or a susceptible look so that when we're running some of these crossers across the field, we have guys coming open. Well, back in 2018, he got stopped. This methodology of some of the bootlegs, the play action, the misdirection got kind of suffocated by the cover four looks, some of these bare line looks where it took away the run gaps and took away those looks you would have downfield from the quarterback. And so he went out and got a traditional drop back passer, Matthew Stafford, that allowed him to run some more traditional concepts and be comfortable. Hey, we're just going to drop back and do some of these things because we have a quarterback with an arm that can deliver those throws. And we have the wide receivers and the talent around to go out and execute these plays. And so for me, I haven't seen the creativity from Sean McVay that I have from some of the other guys in the Shanahan tree that I feel have less talent and have to kind of make do with that. Now, granted, some of the guys I'm listing off have phenomenal offenses, have phenomenal talent on the roster. Like you said, when we're talking about these guys, these are guys that have succeeded at the NFL over the past several years and have built up a resume. For me, I just don't see him as good as Matt LaFleur, Kyle Shanahan, Mike McDaniel in terms of play calling. And then his in game decision making is sometimes bonkers. He mismanages his
Mhm.
timeouts. He doesn't go for it on fourth down as much as he should. And so some of those edges, I think he could get better and evolve in. And I'm waiting to see that once Matthew Stafford's done and gone, is he going to pull an Aaron Donald and just retire, kind of like John Gruden? Or is he going to be able to stick it through, evolve with the NFL, and show why he deserves to be in the conversation, in my opinion, to be a top three play caller?
Yeah, and I agree with you there about the in-game management stuff, and I think it's good that you bring that up because I think he had the humility enough to hire an in-game coach this offseason to help him with that. As
Yeah.
far as getting Matthew Stafford, I think that only helps prop him up that he's able to make it to a Super Bowl with two different QBs. Obviously, that
Yeah.
first year they did get, or not the first year, the first Super Bowl year, they did get shut down by the best defensive mind in NFL history, maybe,
Mm-hmm.
and Tom Brady on the other side. And granted, that game was pretty bad. 13-3 final score, I think, or maybe it was 13-10
It was
at the
13 to
final.
3. There
Yeah,
was, yeah, the Rams got held out of the end zone.
really bad game, but I think in two different eras of the team, he succeeded there. Two iterations, not eras. And as far as creativity goes, where did both of us have the Rams picking in the draft coming into the season? I think both of us
We
had
had
them
them
top
very
five,
low.
right?
Um,
Because we didn't believe in the talent they had there, and despite that, the Rams made a playoff run this year with a guy, a fifth round compensatory pick at receiver, and a fifth round compensatory pick the year prior. And while, yeah, we got to bring up Les Snead here, I want to say for our GM rankings next week, we're doing GMs and front offices next week. I have Les Snead at number 2 as well.
Yeah, no, and I know that you love kind of what the Rams have done in both these iterations. I'm saying the model is very much the same. They take gambles and risks with trading picks for players on expiring
Mhm.
contracts, and they maximize that. And I'm not trying to take anything away from that. My thing is you throw Matthew Stafford on the 49ers. I think he wins the Jimmy Garoppolo year against Patrick Mahomes, and I think he would pull it off this year against Patrick
But
Mahomes.
you can't do that. You
I,
can't
I
put him
know
on the
you can't
Niners.
extrapolate, and I know this is
And,
where it gets very, very
and,
nitpicky, but that's what I'm saying is like McVay made it to the big game. Shanahan's made it to the big game. LaFleur's been on the doorstep of the big game,
mm,
and it's more just a question of kind of that quarterback situation.
well, LaFleur hasn't made it to the Super Bowl yet, so we can't say
That's
that.
what I said. I
And
said the
on the all
doorstep.
right,
Yeah,
that's fair. That's fair. And then as far as the Niners go, you can't put Stafford on the Niners because they can only work because their quarterbacks making pennies in California money.
Well, the Garoppolo deal at the point it
Right.
would have been very similar. So that's that.
Hmm.
I think that comparison is fair. Yes, Purdy and Stafford, you would have to give up a couple players. You wouldn't have as much talent as you do on that
Yeah.
roster, and that completely changes the dynamic. So I get this isn't apples to oranges. I'm just saying my hesitation with McVay putting him as high. He is in my top 10. I have the utmost respect for him. I just think that there are better coaches in the league that I would rather build a team with.
And
And so without
that's
further
fair.
ado, my guy at 2 does come from the Shanahan tree. It is not Shanahan. It is a guy that did coach not only under Kyle Shanahan, but Sean McVay, and that's Matt LaFleur. He left Sean McVay after, I believe, the 20, I think it was 2017 year. 2018, he was the Titans offensive coordinator. Offense wasn't that great. And so I actually had a lot of reservation about this hire. I'm like, what are the Packers doing? Mike McCarthy wasn't a bad head coach. Their GM sucked at putting talent around Aaron Rodgers. And like Mike McCarthy's hands were tied in essence. That was my inclination of it. I'm not saying McCarthy's this great end all be all guy. He is in my top 10, but he's not top 5. And so it goes to that point where Matt LaFleur comes in and he gets 2 MVP seasons out of Aaron Rodgers. And Aaron Rodgers doesn't like the youth movement that Brian Gutekunst and Matt LaFleur were doing, trying to rebuild that offense, revamp it. And he kind of sold. He sold the season after winning 2 MVPs. They go, I believe, 8-9. They were a win or 2 away from making the playoffs. And it was just Rodgers was doing Rodgers type things where he wanted to throw it deep and they just didn't have the playmakers there and he wasn't playing in structure. Well, they turn the keys over to the quarterback they drafted when they come in, and he does really well last year. They make it to the divisional round after beating the Cowboys in the opening wild card weekend. They take the 49ers down to the wire, and really we're a step away from kind of making it to the conference championship and maybe a Super Bowl this year. And so you think that, okay, maybe they'll be able to do this with a guy that's on a cheaper quarterback deal and take that leap and take that step and be true contenders. And for me, Matt LaFleur is going through that second change, and a guy that already made it to 2 NFC championship games, had a 2-time MVP that it seemed like he was kind of washed up, had a bunch of injuries, didn't look like himself, was able to kind of return him the form. I think this guy is really special, and I think the biggest questions come on the defensive side. I have a lot of questions about, I think it's Jeff Hafley. He was Boston College's head coach over the past few seasons, and he's now their new defensive coordinator. So they have a whole bunch of first round picks there, and I'm excited to see if he's going to be able to get the talent out of those guys and really make this a complementary football situation where you have a lot of talent on offense and a lot of talent on defense paired with really good coaching, and that'll propel you to a Super Bowl.
Yeah. First of all, I just want to say I'm a big fan of Matt LaFleur. He's right outside my top 5. He's number 6. My top 5, like I said, they have to be people who can prove it, and my 5 have done that. But outside of that, I think he's one of the most ascendant younger coaches in the league. He's been there 5 years now. The first couple he had I would say leaving his prime, but still very, very good level. Aaron Rodgers,
Yeah.
who at the time, I think a lot of people, myself, believe he was the best quarterback to ever play. That was my belief. I think Mahomes is probably lapping him a bit now. But at that time, I just thought there was no throw he couldn't make. He knows how to escape. He knows how to do everything on the field. And he did give him a little bit of resurgence. Granted, Devontae Adams was also really hitting his stride, being an all-pro first-team level receiver. And then they traded him away, and I think that's when all the Rodgers stuff kind of started his little slip. I don't want to say slip into madness, but he started going a little crazy. Uh, so he had those 2 MVP seasons. LaFleur during his tenure there, 0.675 win percentage. That's 56-27 regular season, 3-4 in the playoffs. So losing record in the playoffs, but still a couple of them were sells, both by Rodgers and the defense. And I'm thinking of the Niners game in particular, or excuse me, the Bucks game in particular. But he's never had more than 1 playoff win in a run, which to say like he's had 3 playoff runs where he's won is pretty good. It's just hasn't gotten past that step. Top 10 scoring offense, only 2 of the 5 years, both Rodgers MVP seasons. I would thought it would be a bit more than that, but I guess not. And then scoring defense as well, 2 out of the 5 years.
Well,
So
okay. I know we're talking about scoring in terms of points on the board.
mhm.
If you're looking at offensive EPA over the past 2 years, the Packers, and this is with Rodgers, kind of the year, like he's not doing everything. He's doing stuff off script. He's clearly kind of spiraling in a sense. Packers are still top 10 in EPA per play. And I think that's a credence to, okay, you have a quarterback that's not buying into the system. You have a quarterback very inexperienced coming into the system, and you're still able to generate top 10 production. And I think that's special.
No, I agree. That's super fair. My thing is you also have to put points in the end zone to win, and
Yep.
and I guess field goals too because those count as points. But his first 3 seasons, I believe, were all like 11 or more wins. I looked it up earlier today, but I
It
forgot the
was
first
13
season.
and 3, 13 and 3,
And then
and
13
then
and 4, I think.
yes, that's when it switched
Yeah.
to a 17, and then they went, I believe, 8 and 9, and then 9
And
and
then
8. So he's had
right.
one losing
So
season.
I get, yeah, one
Um,
losing season, really good stretch to start there. And I think the most important thing for him, and I want to say this past year, I think was LaFleur's best coaching season because with Rodgers, we talk about how Rodgers didn't like adhering to the scheme. I wouldn't either if I was as good as that person was, and it took him a little bit to adjust. But I think this season was the best for LaFleur because he helped facilitate the transition from Rodgers, who, like we've talked about, one of the best to ever do it, to a fourth year rookie, I guess is how you could call it, who I think improved tremendously throughout the year. We say Jordan Love had a really good year last season, or really good year last year, but I think the first 6 to 8 games, Love was leaving a lot out there on the field. Like he was missing throws. There are a lot of open receivers and stuff like that. But his second half of the season, I think, was tremendous, and I think that's like a lot of that is due to how LaFleur was able to work with him there. And as far as coaching trees go, he has one direct guy, not the best head coach, maybe the worst, in Nathaniel Hackett, but he's really good. And out of all the people who haven't won a Super Bowl or who haven't consistently made it, like Shanahan, he's my highest guy. So at number 6, I think that's completely fair.
all right, there we go. I hopefully we didn't lose that Packers segment. I think the way it'll upload. We just had some Wi-Fi connection issues on my end. Um, did you want to kind of retouch on the LaFleur stuff? I know you were kind of going in
Yeah,
on.
yeah, yeah. I don't remember where it left off or anything, but I'll say this past season I think was his most impressive season. We went from one of the best QBs to ever do it. I was hyping up Rodgers a few minutes ago to a really a fourth year rookie in Jordan Love, who had like a same career arc as Rodgers. Right, Rodgers sat his first, I think, 2 seasons and then came in his third. But Jordan Love, who had a really good year last year, and we think about it as a good year, but the first half of the year, I thought he left a lot of meat on the bone. There are a lot of missed throws, a lot of open receivers that he had. And the Packers kind of got off to a bit of a start, but that second half of the year for Love was really tremendous, and it helped propel them to the playoffs. They didn't just beat the Cowboys in the playoffs, like you said; they dominated them in AT&T Stadium, which should have gotten McCarthy fired. But you'll talk about McCarthy later. I won't; he's not on my list. But I think Jordan Love's only ascending. As far as a cheap QB contract goes, I think Love will get extended this offseason following
Yeah.
the Trevor Lawrence extension. So I don't think they'll have that benefit there. But out of all the people who haven't made the Super Bowl, won one, or like consistently made it, like Shanahan, LaFleur's at the top of my list. So I hold him in really high regard. But he just have to prove it to break into that top 5, and he hasn't proven it yet. And then as far as the coaching tree goes, like I was saying, he has one guy directly off his tree, and it's not a great coach, maybe the worst head coach ever, Nathaniel Hackett, who has been reunited with his friend Rodgers. So we'll have to see how that plays out in New York this season. But LaFleur, he's up there for me. It's just when I'm looking at what's the head coach's job to do? It's to win games and win the big game. All the guys in front of him have done it, except for Shanahan, who's gotten there a couple of times and failed. So
Yeah.
that's where it stands for me.
Absolutely. And if LaFleur had somehow beaten Shanahan in a couple of those games, he
Mm-hmm.
might have been in the Super Bowl with those losses. And maybe there's flip flop there from just your perspective and the logic that you're bringing here. And they're all fair. I'm jumping on the Matt LaFleur hype train because I really think this, like, next year or two will be that coming out year where it's just like, he's that dude. And like people are going to really start like understanding like what he's doing because, like you said, guys were wide open during the regular season all the time, and Jordan Love was missing some of those. And then all of a sudden they started getting in synced. And then what they did with the Cowboys, a lot of it was breaking like play rules, but it was because they knew what the Cowboys
Yeah.
defense was doing, which again shows the preparation that the coaching staff is doing, shows that the players are buying in and able to understand what's going on, and it's working. And so when I look at a coaching staff that I think is really a defensive play caller away and really just everybody gelling for another year or so, I think they really could be a Super Bowl team. And they're one of my favorites if I were to place money on a team to go to the Super Bowl and represent the NFC. So we'll move on. We spent I feel like 20 minutes on just the first two slots. The guy I have at 3, Andy Reid prodigy, a guy that's won a Super Bowl, that we talk about those eras of can you do it with all this roster turnover, having another quarterback. John Harbaugh comes into the Baltimore Ravens situation, drafts Joe Flacco. They win a Super Bowl. He then drafts Lamar Jackson. And I understand we should probably be giving the general manager credit
Ozzie
there.
Newsome, best GM
the
ever.
the greatest, yeah, the best GM of all time. But again, if that's the best GM and he hired and was part of the hiring process of John Harbaugh, clearly there's some respect there. Harbaugh has obviously made it to the Super Bowl, won it. He's had a 2-time MVP now with Lamar Jackson. He's been on the doorstep a couple times, going back to the 2019 season when they had the number 1 seed, and then this past year when they were in the conference championship game, and really just a couple plays away from winning it. And I think that kind of goes on Todd Monken not being prepared for that
Yeah.
moment and that situation. And you fix those things out as you go. And the fact that he's brought in guys like Mike McDonald and Todd Monken over the past couple of years and been able to evolve with the NFL, he's one of the smarter in-game decision makers. And he understands that, hey, if I have guys calling the plays, I can focus more on what's going on kind of in the moment. And I love that about him. I think that's one of his greatest strengths. And that's why he's at number 3 for me.
Yeah, I'm a big John Harbaugh fan. Obviously, he's been there and won it, right? So he's in my top 5. I have him at number 4, so just one spot down. He's been there 16 years. I didn't know
Yep.
it was that long. .618 record, 160 and 99, so not quite 100 losses in the regular season yet. 12-10 in the playoffs, so an even bag there, but a Super Bowl win. So we'll take it, right? It was
And that Joe Flacco run
oh
was
yeah, that's
very
something of
special. I
legend.
mean,
That's like maybe
he
the best postseason run ever.
because they beat the Broncos with Peyton Manning, and
Hmm.
that was the darling team that year. I believe they beat the Patriots, then they beat the 49ers, and the 49ers were hot. I mean, Colin
Well,
Kaepernick, that offense under Jim Harbaugh.
they beat another team as well. I think it was the Steelers because
I think
they played 4 games in the
it was the
playoffs.
Colts. I think they hosted, and
The
everybody
Colts.
kind of saw
Okay.
that. But I mean, it was Ray Lewis's going out year. I think they were
Hmm.
playing either a home game. I think the Colts might have been a wild card team. I don't know if they won the AFC South that year. But then it was you go on the road to
Yeah.
Mile High. Then you play you really get into the heat of the best. And they just Joe Flacco. I think it was he threw 12 passing touchdowns, 0 interceptions during that run. Jacoby Jones had that special moment. The power went out in New Orleans in the Super
Yeah.
Bowl. So just a really special run to send kind of Ray Lewis off his second Super Bowl win with that team before retiring.
Yeah, I actually wrote that down. The win was the infamous Beyonce light fiasco Super Bowl. So interesting one there. But looking at the scoring offense and defense for offense, 6 out of the 16 years. So the offense has been really inconsistent and sporadic. The only recent good top 10 offense was the Monken year this year. I think Todd Monken has really dialed it in. Other than the fiasco in the conference championship game. On the defensive side, though, 12 out of 16 years in top 10 scoring defense. And that's you're bracketed by guys like Ed Reid, who probably the best safety ever, if not top 2 or 3. Ray Lewis, one of the best linebackers ever. And then a ton of other support players. Terrell Suggs, he's not a support player.
Yep.
He's a guy in his own right. I think of Haloti Nada, Elvis Dumervil, just
Mm-hmm.
a ton
Oh
of
yeah.
people on that defense that help make it happen. And then you talk about how Harbaugh is able to take a step back and manage the game as a whole because he has good guys on offense and defense that he hires. If you remember, he's a special teams guy. That's his bread and butter.
Mm-hmm.
And I can specifically recall, this has to be about 10 years ago. It was against the Bengals, and it was the last play of the game, and it was a punt. And Harbaugh told all his players to lay down on top of the Bengals players so they can't down the ball, knowing, because he's a special teams coordinator, this is a punt play, knowing that if the clock runs out, there's nothing a penalty can't stop it. And they won the game like that. And it's that kind of stuff that he can draw from the back of his mind to help win that just makes him so fascinating. Another thing too, In 16 years, only 2 losing seasons. One in 2015, so when the Broncos made it back to the Super Bowl. Had they been a good team then, we may not have played the Broncos that year. And then in 2021, so 2 years ago, or 3 years ago now, excuse me. But playoff burst in 11 seasons, just a real consistent winner. And then looking at his coaching tree, I don't know if you want to say these guys are direct offshoots of Harbaugh, but he has worked with or had guys work underneath him, like a ton of head coaches throughout our league. Jim Caldwell, David Culley down with the Texans for a year, Vic Fangio, Leslie Frazier, Gary Kubiak, Mike McDonald just got hired, Chuck Pagano, Rex Ryan, and a lot of other coaches who are have been prominent throughout the last decade or two. So he's a really important coach in our history, and of course he stems from Andy Reid, who's both of our number one guys.
Yeah, no, this is a guy that deserves to be on the top five based on his resume, based on how the Ravens are built, how they've been so successful, the evolution of his game. Because, like you said, you brought up some of those top 10 numbers just from a point scored. The defense has been lights out, and you have to be. Your division rival is the Pittsburgh Steelers. You're
Yeah,
supposed to get in these 9-6 grudge matches where you're just like haymaker after haymaker in terms of hits.
well, it's not only the Steelers too. Like the Killer B era with the Steelers was like phenomenal on offense, right? But you got to think about the Bengals too. Not only in this
Mhm.
Joe Burrow era, the Andy Dalton era Bengals, they made their. I think they won the division or made the playoffs in 7 straight years with Marvin Lewis there.
AJ Green was
Mhm.
really
Did,
good.
didn't win a playoff game, but they made it 7 years in a row, so they were strong there. He obviously didn't have to worry about the Browns for too long, but the Browns are like on the up and up there. So he's just been consistent throughout his tenure with the Ravens, and that's why he's my number four. I want to go to my number three before we jump onto your number four. That's Kyle Shanahan. One of the most creative play callers I think our league has ever seen. He's been there 7 years, so the same time that McVay got hired, Shanahan got hired. His record is a little bit worse. He's a 64-51 in the regular season, so sub 600 win percentage, but he has one more playoff win, so he's been to one more playoff game. The thing I have with Shanahan is 3 losing seasons. Out of all the coaches I have listed, so in my top 10, none of them have more than 2 losing seasons. And this is looking at guys like Tomlin, who's been there how many years? 17. Harbaugh, been there 16 years. Andy Reid has been with the Chiefs for 15 years. So guys that have been there for quite a while, and they have less than 3 losing seasons. And you can attribute that to like having some QB troubles a couple of years. Garoppolo, injury prone guy. And then it was 2 seasons. Is it 2 seasons ago now where it was Garoppolo or it was Lance Garoppolo, and then Purdy came on the scene. So a little bit of QB turmoil there, but I think he's had consistently maybe the most talented roster over the last 5-ish years, something like that. But he just comes up short a little bit, and that's why he's not two for me. 2 Super Bowl appearances. He lost to Andy Reid and the Chiefs in both of them, and I think you could argue that both were choke jobs by the Niners. They did have late leads in both of those games, but really good play caller, top 10 scoring offense in 3 years. 2 of those years are the Brock Purdy years. So he's been able to take a mystery relevant QB, maybe a bit underdrafted for what he's been able to do in the league, but still a guy with subpar athleticism, maybe subpar like seeing the field, decision making skills, and made an incredible offense out of it. If you look at all their advanced stats last year, they were number one in like everything versus cover one, cover two, cover three, first half, second half, late game, like any split you want to make, they were number one. And it's because of Shanahan's play calling with the supporting cast that he has there. We'll talk about John Lynch and the GMs next week, but I think he's been in a really good spot, but he hasn't been able to get to the top like a McVay has, like a Reid has. And for me, that's why he's number three. But I think what he's been able to do in terms of the revolution of new offenses and stuff like that, I think his impact on that is insurmountable. And guys like Mike McDaniel, you can throw Matt LaFleur in there because a lot of these guys were with him in Atlanta and with him in Washington when his father was the coach there. He's been like the start, or I guess not the start, the second guy on the tree because his dad was technically at the top of all of those guys, and you got to credit him for that. D'Amico Ryan's as well, Robert Saleh as well. Like he's put head coaches in the league, just not a ton of great ones as well. So McDaniel and D'Amico Ryan's look good so far, but Saleh,
Yeah,
well,
no,
actually, real quick, Saleh, I'm putting more of the blame on Joe Douglas. All right, Saleh's doing the best with what he's got.
I would like to see Salah evolve more on the offensive
Mm-hmm.
side. I don't think he had the right. play
Is it?
caller infrastructure with Zach Wilson. I don't know if Zach Wilson should have been the pick there, but then you have Nathaniel Hackett and Aaron Rodgers, and it's like, okay, if that doesn't work like it did 3 years ago, then you're really back at square one. So that's a side tangent about Saleh. He's on neither of our top tens,
Yeah.
not an honorable mention, but he is a head coach in the league, and that's a hard job. I don't want to take anything away from it or make it seem like he's done a completely putrid job, because that defense has been lights out since he's pretty much gotten there in New York. At number four, Kyle Shanahan for me is at five. And the biggest thing I go back to is his play designs are great. A lot of these kind of Shanahan play designs, it's funny. You go back 10, 20, even to the Bill Walsh era. I think it was like a double tight end screen or a release up the seams. And Bill Walsh was doing it in the 80s. And it's some of these play designs are just getting kind of rebaked in a way, revamped. But the Bill Walsh, the original Mike Shanahan kind of coaching trees, play designs, it was all about getting guys in space. How can we pretty much put this coverage in a bind to where we have a guy running wide open? And we see that with the 49ers offense, and it's amazing. Since they traded for Christian McCaffrey and they've had
Mm-hmm.
all their guys on the field, they've been unstoppable. When some of those guys have gotten injured, Debo, Trent Williams, some of those superstars, this offense looks very average. And my concern is you have Christian McCaffrey, who is getting older, has an injury history, is on the Madden cover, has about every curse written on the book for like some of this stuff. And it's like forbid that he gets injured, some of their other stars get injured. I don't know if this offense has enough answers to work past that to be better than average. And when I look at some of these other offenses or other play callers from this tree, Matt LaFleur, he doesn't have Christian McCaffrey coming out of the backfield, Brandon Ayuk, Debo Samuel, these guys to work with. He's working with great playmakers. Don't get me wrong. Some of the guys that he's working with Christian Watson, Romeo Dobbs, Jaden Reed, some of the tight ends, what we've seen out of Aaron Jones the past couple of years. Phenomenal stuff. It's not on that level in terms of talent. And that's why, for me, he's a notch or two lower, because I feel like if he was that play caller, he would be able to finish those games like we saw against the Chiefs both times with Jimmy G and then with Brock Purdy this past year. And he wasn't able to do it. And so for me, he is at number five, right after number four. The guy I have is Mike McDaniel. And what he has done the past 2 years in Miami is insane. We've seen so many teams over the years value a speed wide receiver. John Ross to the Bengals, Ted Ginn to the Dolphins. We could go down the list of all these speedsters that have come out. Tyreek Hill was obviously a known product. Jalen Waddle had already shown he was really good since his rookie year. So those two guys being on the team, they were probably going to produce. But what he's done with them, Tyreek Hill has gotten more production the past couple of years in Miami than he had prior with the Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid. And some of that is because of the motion designs and getting these guys out in space and creating mismatches that are just insane to watch. And I don't see Mike McDaniel with this just five-star superstar guys where he's got Christian McCaffrey and George Kittle. And like, his running backs are fast, don't get me wrong, but you can't put him in that echelon. He doesn't have a tight end in terms of elite guy that's just busting the seam or able to get on some of these crossing routes and just like create chaos. And that for me is why Mike McDaniel's at number four. Obviously, he hasn't gone past that 9-8 record. Obviously, he falters down the stretch. The defense hasn't been all that great since he's gotten there. They are overspent on the cap because they are heavily invested in the team that they currently have. But for me, it's the play design element of Mike McDaniel. And I feel like he is going to be the next wave of evolutions in the NFL that we see. And we've seen that already the past couple of years in how he's used motion, not only full field, but half field motions. And I am so excited to see what he brings to the table this fall.
I like a lot of what you said. First of all, McDaniel is on my list. He's number 10 for me. So I have quite a few ahead of him this far. But like you said, pretty good his first 2 years. Made the playoffs both years. 9-8 the first year, and then 11-6 this past year.
Oh,
Nope.
yes. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't know why I said 9-8. I think I'm still stuck on Matt LaFleur going eight,
yeah,
nine,
yeah.
9-8. Yeah.
It's but yeah, two playoff losses, no losing seasons, which is impressive, right? Even though it's only been 2 years, he did inherit Jalen Waddle, who I believe his rookie year set the receptions record for wide
Yep.
receivers, and then Tyreek Hill in the trade prior to, or I guess yeah, prior to that first season for Mike McDaniel. So the two speedsters there. A lot of speedsters across the offense. I hear what you're saying. He doesn't have a McCaffrey. He doesn't have a a Kittle or a Debo or even an Ayuk. But he has or don't even get me started on the O line. He doesn't have a Trent Williams anywhere, despite what Tehran, despite how good Tehran Armstead is. He's only out there
He's
for
not
like
Trent
8 games.
Williams.
So like, and he's
Yeah.
not Trent Williams. So I think in terms of evolution, like you're talking about, we said this during the season. I think week 3 or 4. It was after a big Dolphins game. I can't remember who they played, but I think we both said actually, that I think he's the final evolution of the Shanahan offense. And from there, it's going to be the McDaniel offense. But I think what he is benefited from, it's not these superstar cast that Shanahan has, or even like, I guess you could say McVay because he had Cooper Cup and Cooks and Robert Woods for so long. But he has
And Todd Gurley back in
Todd
the, if you
yeah,
go
yeah.
back to those like first couple of years, I wouldn't. Yeah, this Dolphins offense, I don't think is from a talent level at all
From an
positions. It's not
overall
there.
talent, no. But what is unique about this offense is it's by far the fastest out of every offense
Yeah,
in the league.
it
They
is.
they probably have 6 of the 10 fastest players in the league on their offense alone. And I think what that allows you to do in terms of motion, first of all, if you look at all the motions they do with Tyreek Hill and how defenses have to respect him because of the speed, it's bizarre. I think I saw a stat, and this was the same week 4 or 5 game we were talking about. They did like 30 different motions for Tyreek Hill that game. So
Yeah.
just crazy there. But when you're able to have 4 guys on the field that can burn all your DBs, you're able to do so many things with that. And it's not just like run Tyreek Hill down the seam. It's cross him with Waddle, have Mostert come out the flat and have Achan take it up the gut for a touchdown or something like that. And I think when you have something like that, it's just really hard to, I guess, play against it. And it's hard to I I guess down to down. I'm trying to figure out how to say this. Down to down, it's hard for you to lose each down when you have such insurmountable speed on offense. Is how I would put it. And I
Yeah.
think what he's done with that is obviously incredibly impressive. But for me, both seasons and the first season, obviously, Tua was down for the count the second half of the year with the concussions and stuff like that. But both seasons, they have fallen flat towards the end of the year and in the playoffs. So for me, in order to move him up over some of these other younger coaches or coaches who haven't coached as long, they've got to perform down the stretch. And I haven't seen them do that thus far.
Yeah, and so the biggest thing that I'll point to is Kyle Shanahan inherited the 49ers back in 2017. They make the Super Bowl in 2019. Year 3 of the Shanahan. And I'm not saying the Dolphins are going to make it to the Super Bowl. I think the Packers and LaFleur have a better shot at that. That's why I rate LaFleur a little bit higher. But for me, Mike McDaniel, like we talked about last year, it's like the final iteration of the Shanahan offense. And I think he's the one evolving it. He understands some of the wrinkles that can come from it. He's prioritized speedsters in the past several drafts. He understands that, hey, I don't have Tyreek Hill forever. And so we see a succession plan and we see how he uses speed. And we've seen other offenses try to incorporate speed in their offense, and they haven't done it as well. And so that's where I think his creativity is what's going to benefit him the most. The podcast series that Jordan Rodriguez had on all these play callers from the Shanahan Tree, it also seemed like McDaniel had the healthiest mindset. He was not addicted to winning so much as he was so much happier he had got cleaned up and prioritized things right in his life. And you could see his love and passion just infect not only the way he approached the game, but how he's leading the team. And so I think he's great. Again, it's me jumping ahead probably a couple years where I think he'll really kind of hit that, where it's like he's in conference championship games, he's playing for Super Bowls, stuff like that. And I think we're really close on seeing that. So we're almost outside the top 5. Like I said, Kyle Shanahan's my top 5. We're like an hour in. This is great. I love this. We keep going on and on. I think it'll be a little bit shorter from here on out. We've gotten a lot of the stuff out about Reid's coaching tree, the Shanahan coaching tree, but you have a new guy here, and technically, you could probably link him to Sean McVay in a sense because he coached under Sean Gruden. Sean McVay kind of came from the John Gruden background in terms of that subsect of the Mike Shanahan tree. I think there's even some connection with John Gruden to Andy Reid and that early Eagles kind of coaching staff. So he has touches to both of these, but he's kind of his own person, and it's really special what he's cooked up since he's been hired. What, as long as John Harbaugh? Yeah,
1 year
I think they were
longer.
both 1 year.
1 year
Yeah, that's
longer.
right. He
Mhm.
was hired in '07. They won the Super Bowl in '08. That's right.
Yep. Mike Tomlin goes without saying. I think in terms of coaches, you could probably connect everybody, right? Because at least through one or two people, because coaches play or coach for like a ton of teams. But Mike Tomlin, his record 173 and 100 in the regular season. His playoff record does have some blemishes. It's 8-10, so a negative playoff record. This is actually why I put John Harbaugh above him. I ended up switching these two today, but Mike Tomlin, 0 losing seasons throughout his entire tenure. For 17 years, like there are people, Mike McDaniel's done it for 2 years, but for 17 years, it's impressive. I don't think there's any
It's
coach
insane.
that's done it for 10 years, God forbid 17. I guess Andy Reid with the Chiefs, but
Well, that's what I was about to
17
say.
is,
There are stretches. The
yeah.
Cowboys, I think, back in the 70s, 80s, had like a 20 plus year stretch where they didn't have a losing season. So
Well, I mean,
there are different stretches. I
and
I
I'm
know
talking
era
about like in, yeah,
pre.
yeah, the expansion era and stuff. But and what's even more bizarre, only 3 of those seasons were at 500. So
Yeah,
14 winning seasons throughout that time. Two Super Bowl appearances. Obviously, they beat Arizona in 2008. Like really cool game there. The James Harrison play, the Santonio Holmes play, good stuff there. They lose to an ascendant Aaron Rodgers in 2010. But since 2016, which was the Killer Bees era, that's like Roethlisberger, Le'Veon Bell, Antonio Brown, no playoff wins since 2016. So, despite incredibly successful regular seasons and winning regular seasons, they haven't had that postseason push since then. In terms of offense and defense, 6 out of the 17 years, top 10 scoring offense. Most of those were during that Killer Bees era. But his defense, and he is a defensive guy. He started with or I think his only defensive coordinator year was 1 year with the Dolphins before coming to
yeah,
the Steelers. Top 10 scoring defense 11 out of 17 years. And it's across multiple eras. We talked about how Harbaugh's been able to bridge eras. You got to look at the Steelers, too. You have guys like James Harrison, who was a stalwart there forever.
Troy Polamalu.
Troy Polamalu, undrafted free agent, James Harrison, by the way.
Yeah,
One of the best stories there. And now you're seeing it with guys like TJ Watt. They trade for
Minka
Minka
Fitzpatrick.
Fitzpatrick,
Yeah,
Alex Highsmith, our Charlotte native. Go
got to
Niners.
represent.
Yeah,
Yeah,
go Niners. But like different groups of talent and different ways that the game's evolved, because when he started, we were a really not a run heavy, but it was still that run centric offense in the late 2000s. And now you're seeing all these Shanahan style concepts, and he's been able to adapt to that. Their defense has been really good consistently over the past couple of years. And I think what's more impressive is that despite having defensive stars, I don't think, at least over the last 5 or 6 years, that their offense has been like overly glutted with talent. There's not a ton of big names on that offense. There's only a few on the defense, and I think what Tomlin's able to do is, number one, manage the locker room probably better than any coach ever. Right? We didn't know anything about Antonio Brown's stuff, Le'Veon Bell's like wanting more contracts and stuff. We didn't hear about any of that until they were gone. And once
yep.
he lost his like control, not control, but like his effect over them in the locker room, that's when all that stuff came out. So really good locker room guy, and just raises the team ceiling overall. If he's your head coach, your floor is 500, or I guess now it's above 500 because you can't. I guess if you tied a game, you could be at 500, but it's just a really good resume. It's hard for me to put any coach ahead of him that, number one, hasn't won a Super Bowl, and number two, throughout their span, he's just a consistent winner, and he's able to get the most out of his team. Now, the offense has been down the last couple of years, but I think with the hire of the Falcon Arthur Smith, the Falcons' old head coach, that's his name, right? Arthur Smith. He was a decent coordinator in Tennessee, so I'm excited. This is me being genuine. I am excited to see what the offense is this year, because I think if he can run some stuff with what Russ was able to do, early Russ, like down the sideline with Lockett or with Pickens now, I think it should be an upgrade over the baby hands Pickett era.
Okay, so this is my thoughts on Tomlin, and I obviously have a lot of respect for him because I have him at 6. You talked about how you had Matt LaFleur at 6, so we're kind of wrapping up, kind of outside of the top 5. Where you have Mike Tomlin at 5, I have him at 6. My biggest reservation is we talk about this like span of eras. Like John Harbaugh went from like Joe Flacco to Lamar Jackson. And I think Lamar Jackson is a little bit more talented than Joe Flacco. When we saw Andy Reid kind of make the transition from the Eagles to the Chiefs, it was kind of like Donovan McNabb, Alex Smith, these kind of journeyman guys, these kind of guys that aren't like super, super elite, like top 5, but they're solid, average starters that you're able to kind of get the most out of. And then he lands Patrick Mahomes. And we just see this continuity of just them being able to perform. he came into a situation where Big Ben already won a Super Bowl. They have some of the pieces that they had with Hines Ward, Antoine Randall L, good running game. Then, like you said, Antonio Brown, Le'Veon Bell. But then all of that's kind of goes away. They didn't find their answer in Kenny Pickett, Mason Rudolph, even with some of these years when Big Ben was kind of banged up. And like you look at all these things, and my biggest hesitation with Mike Tomlin is like, okay, so we've seen this evolution um, where he hasn't kind of stepped up, and they have this massive like cap allocation in terms of the defensive side of the ball, which is crazy. I mean, I think they had the highest cap allocation on defense this past year. They've been up towards the top of it, so they pay their guys, whether it be T.J. Watt or Minka Fitzpatrick, and I, they have definitely provided enough talent on that side, but on the offensive side, they haven't really gotten much out of it. And so, okay, they bring in Russell Wilson, they bring in Justin Fields, guys that hold on to the ball really long, are going to take sacks and negative plays. And this is a team the past couple of years that's had a negative point differential and just eked out wins because they grind them out. And that's a credit to Mike Tomlin. But it's not because of what they're doing on the offense. I'm not seeing an evolution there. And for me, Arthur Smith is going backwards, not forwards. Like you got to get a guy from a Shanahan tree, or maybe even Andy Reid, like Clint Kubiak. He goes to the Saints this past year. I thought that was an excellent hire by Dennis Allen from the 49ers staff of going, hey, I can get the defense up the par. The offense is what's sucking, and evolving in that process, I haven't seen it from him. He's not the best at in-game decision making. And so for me, it's like I'm resting a lot of the laurels on, yes, 17 straight winning seasons, a Super Bowl title. But a lot of this was with things he inherited, not things that he's been able to build. So I see him as a guy that's been able to sustain, not so much as like, okay, we're now one of the best teams. And so for me, it's like he's got to find that quarterback, that guy on offense. And I don't think it's the iteration they have going into the fall.
Well, and I did cut out for a second there, but I heard most of what you said. As far as the quarterback goes, not finding the quarterback, that's not his fault.
Yeah.
They brought in a new general manager over the past couple of years.
Omar Khan is
And
good. Yeah.
and but they haven't figured it out yet. In terms of the offensive stuff, he did inherit Big Ben, who I believe it was his second year, right, when he won the Super Bowl.
It's second year for Mike Tomlin. Big
No.
Ben was
Big
drafted
Ben.
in
It was Big
05.
Ben's second year
No.
when he won
04. No.
when he won that first
Big,
Super Bowl, right?
yeah, with Bell Cowher in 05.
Yes.
So that was his second year.
He had a third year QB when he came into the league. Obviously, really good at that point, but third or fourth year, and Ben something like that. And Ben Roethlisberger.
Yeah.
Obviously, he was the guy at that point, and he had the team with Hines Ward, Santonio Holmes, Antoine Randall, whatever, what have you. He inherited that, yes, but they came and went, and he was able to build the team with Le'Veon Bell, with Antonio Brown, with some of the second round receivers they drafted. Mike Wallace, I'm thinking of Marquise Wheaton, guys who had good seasons, even though they might have flamed out of the league. Now George Pickens, Deontay Johnson, some of these guys like that.
Martavis Bryant was stellar a couple of years. Yeah.
So absolutely. I'm not going to put the fact that they don't have a QB all on Tomlin, because I think that's the front office's job, the GM's job. And obviously they're trying with Russ. Getting him for the vet men, I think, is fair value this past season. But I do think there needs to be an improvement on offense. But I think we are really underrating 17 straight non-losing seasons. Like your job as the head coach is to right, but like
the same.
It felt like we were kind of disconnecting there. But in truth, he's 5 for me, 6 for you. But yeah, it's like your job as the head coach is to win games, and as far as records go, nobody's done it more consistently than Tomlin in his time there. Yeah. But I think that's my piece there.
So like a philosophy standpoint, Arthur Smith, even going back to his time with the Titans, likes throwing across the middle. Wilson's not necessarily good at that. Pickens is an outside wide receiver. Like you got to bring in a play caller that's going to maximize that and win those one-on-one matchups. So maybe you go even a different direction and find a guy from like Ben Johnson's tree. Try to get a guy from the Lions staff where you can be a run-heavy team, because with Omar Khan, they bolster that offensive line. You're running a lot of stuff. You get bootlegs or play action off that, and then you're able to find Pickens on these one-on-one matchups. And that's how you win games, especially with their investment in the tight end position with Pat Freiermuth and Darnell Washington out of Georgia last year. Like they have so many options, and Arthur Smith might make it work. It's just from a preference standpoint of looking at what he likes doing and what the quarterbacks are, that's where it's like I feel like Mike
Yeah.
Tomlin almost has a disconnect on that side of the ball until I see it work without a guy named Big Ben. That's my hesitation with putting him in the top five.
Yeah, we'll have to see how it works this year. Obviously, Smith's going to have to adapt. He's not been known to do that when he's the one handling the reins and stuff like that. But we'll see. Now that he's been demoted, maybe he has a change in philosophy there. But so far, we've been equal, except for I've had McVay and you've had Mike McDaniel. McVay's 7 for you, so you'll have already talked about him a little, or we've talked about him a little bit. For me, number 7 is a guy that is not on your list, and it's a guy that I was surprised wasn't on your list because I thought what he's done under his stretch in Detroit, not his interim year in Miami, but during his time in Detroit, I think he's done something that has been more impressive than what a lot of people have done, and that's winning the first playoff games, not games for I think it's 31 years was their playoff drought, but that's Dan Campbell. Obviously, he has the "we're gonna bite your knees off" mentality. He's like the real players coach, right? If you picture taking like I don't know, like just like a nasty linebacker and putting him at head coach, that's what you picture with Dan Campbell. 3 years with Detroit. Obviously, his record isn't the best because they started that. I think their first year was 13-1, really bad. That was when the Stafford trade happened. The team was not good at that point, but
Yeah.
since then, if I'm doing my math right here, 16-10-1 or 16-10, excuse me. Since then, um, yeah, because of the playoffs. Yeah. So good since then. Obviously, this year they take the leap. He's had Ben Johnson the last 2 years. I think that was a phenomenal hire, and they've really taken their strides there. But they made their playoff run this year, 2 wins. I think they kind of choked the game away versus the Niners this past year in the
They
conference
did.
championship. How we talk about if the Packers had held on versus the Niners a couple of times. We could talk about the Lions like that this past year,
Mm-hmm.
but I think bringing them their first playoff win, top 10 offense in 2 of the 3 seasons, and I think the improvement on the defense over the course of the 3 years is something to look at. Obviously, it hasn't been good. This is why we talk about every year. Hey, they need somebody opposite Hutchinson. They need DBs this year. But I think the mentality that he has to bring his team from 3-13-1 to his second year, they were like 1-7, 1-8 to start that year, and they finished 9-8 that year. And then this past year, 13-4. Hold on, I gotta look that up. But a really good year this year, leading to playoff wins, is something special. And this exercise, our goal is to build around this coach or player or GM or whatever for the next 2 years. And I can't think of a more ascendant coach based on what he started with than Dan Campbell. Out of all the coaches on I think both of our lists here, he inherited probably the second worst situation. I have a guy that inherited a much worse one, and he's a little bit further down the list. But I think what he's able to done with less, I would say, compared to all these other coaches, has been phenomenal.
For me, the hesitation is, and I think Brad Holmes has hit on a few players that have kind of masked, I think, concerns on their overall roster construction that I think will bite them in the butt moving forward. They kind of take Jameer Gibbs pretty high, and I think he's a special player. I like where they took Laporta. Amon Ra, I think, was a late day 2, early day 3 player when he was drafted. They have prioritized the offensive line. A lot of things I love there. What they've gone about with Jared Goff, that's my biggest hesitation. They trade for him. They say, hey, you're our guy. He's obviously been a big part of them going 9-8 last year and then this past year, making it to the NFC Championship game, being a couple plays away from making the big game. And that's huge, especially for a franchise that has not seen winning times in a very, very long time. But we've seen guys like Kevin Stefanski bring winning seasons to the Cleveland Browns recently. I don't hold him, and he's higher up for you. But again, that's not a guy just because you bring a winning culture and you can win a couple seasons. That doesn't move the needle for me as much as I don't think he recognized what Andy Reid recognized many, many years later. And that's like, you got to go find a superstar quarterback. And they had a top 5 pick. They could have tried to move up for a guy like Stroud or Richardson or even taken a Will Levis then and try to build around that rookie contract with some of the talent they have. And I think they could have made it work. And instead, I think they're tied to a quarterback that has a ceiling. I think that some of the positions they moved up for or took with high premium picks, they're going to have to pay in a couple of years, and that's going to have them pressed against the cap. And I think there could have been better value gained elsewhere. And I think that will be something that time will tell. And that is my issue with Dan Campbell, is he is a part of that process. Him and Brad Holmes are on the same page about how they want to build the roster and go about playing football. And for me, it's a worry outside of the offensive line of how they've gone about constructing the team.
So, a couple things. For me, number one, I'm crediting roster construction to the GMs because that's their job.
But the
Obviously,
quarterback,
obviously, Dan
I
Campbell's a
think the
part of that.
quarterback,
Hold on. I think what you're talking about with Goff and with taking non-premium players and Gibbs and other people like that, Jack Campbell as well in the first round.
yeah,
I think that's even more of a credence to Campbell to do what he's doing with lesser or less important positions when they have had the chances to like take a Devin Witherspoon or I can't even think of who they passed on 2 years ago. But I think that's more of a credit to Dan Campbell when he's able to take Jared Goff to the conference championship game. You know who else did that? Sean McVay,
Sean
who's
McVay.
number two on my. I guess he's a bit lower for you there, but and you also brought up Stefanski. When you're talking about can bring a couple winning seasons here to an organization like the Browns or the Lions, that's huge. Coaches
It
don't
is
do that.
huge.
The only coach that's done that for the Lions and forever is Jim Caldwell, and he, I think, wrongfully got the boot there. But like this is what matters when you're a coach is bringing the wins there. And I think when we're talking about sustained wins, if I look at what the Lions did last year and their current roster and retaining Ben Johnson, that's an important part of it too. Dan Campbell's a part of that. Like if Ben Johnson didn't like Dan Campbell or didn't want to be there, he would have been the head coach of Washington or Carolina or and a number of teams this offseason and the previous offseason. You got to remember 2 years ago, he didn't even take interviews. He came back like that. So I think all of that together, like keeping your good talent there and winning with, I guess, less important players is even more of a credence for Dan Campbell. And I
Well, no,
think,
it's not.
and I
It's not
think,
saying
and
important.
and
It's
I
more
think
saying
that,
that when they have to get paid, it's going to like restrict how they're able to add talent. It's not right
and
now. I'm saying this is something that's going to be realized in a couple of years.
and I agree with you there. You could always trade him or do stuff like that, but I think when you're on this trajectory like you are now, 313 to 9-8 to it was 12-5 this past year. I looked it up.
Yeah,
Um, I think number one, your ceiling is much higher. Like the ceiling is the roof, as Michael Jordan would say. They were a couple plays away from making the Super Bowl this past year. And I think with improvement in like on their team, they drafted Tyrion Arnold and Rakestraw, two DBs that they needed. I think improvement in areas that they need. Brad Holmes nailed that in this draft. I think the ceiling is very high for them. When you're talking about a guy like LaFleur or McDaniel making the Super Bowl, I'm thinking the Lions and Dan Campbell. That's like my
yeah,
process there. And so that's
and
why I have him a bit higher than McDaniel and then the two other people that we'll talk about in a few.
I think that's completely fair. You brought up the point about retention of Ben Johnson, and that's obviously part of Dan Campbell. This is a guy that Dan Campbell kind of promoted to the OC role. He's done really well. But if he were to leave, that's where it's just like this is where like chunks of the wall and the foundation
Mm-hmm.
start coming out, and I have concerns about it. I haven't seen a second iteration. We've seen Matt LaFleur with and without Aaron Rodgers now. It's one of those things that until I see more of Dan Campbell, I love what I see about him. He's an honorable, but he's my first honorable mention. I love the dude. I love his personality. I love the energy. I love everything about what he's done for the Lions. He has restored the roar there. I'm just a little hesitant of putting him with these guys that I think are evolving the game in terms of scheme, or that they have a resume that is a lot more impressive because they've been to Super Bowls. They've been winning for a lot longer. Like we talk a guy like Mike Tomlin that we both had above him, 17 consecutive winning seasons. Now, granted, the Steelers are a storied franchise and have been since the 70s, but it's one of those things where it's like, can we see this continued before giving him that stamp? And that's my hesitation
Yeah,
with it.
and that's fair. Like I said, my top five: Reid, Super Bowl winner; McVay, Super Bowl winner; Shanahan, brilliant offensive mind, and been to two Super Bowls; Harbaugh, Super Bowl winner; Tomlin, Super Bowl winner. So outside of that group, it's hard, and that's why I have
Yeah.
LaFleur next and Campbell there. So like, if you take those guys away, my list starts with LaFleur and Campbell. So I think it's pretty fair there. I think we can jump right into number eights because we've both done our 1 through 7s,
Yeah,
unless you
so
have
our,
words
our
about
one through
McVay.
sevens, the only difference was Mike McDaniel's there for me, Dan Campbell is there for you, Dan Campbell's honorable mention, Mike McDaniel's 10 for you. So
Mhm.
it's very interesting how we have that position. It's really just two guys kind of flip flopped. Everybody else is the same. This, like you said, this is where things get interesting. I think these last three kind of share like our perspective on the rest of the coaching landscape.
Yeah, for sure. So number 8 for me is another Sean McDermott. There's a lot of Sean's in our league, but Sean McDermott. He was hired the same time as McVay and Shanahan were. So all of them 7 years. Only one losing season during his tenure, and that was Josh Allen's rookie year. And that's also the only time he's missed the playoffs. Every other year, made the playoffs. He even won a playoff game his first year, and that was when it was Tyrod
The
Taylor
Jacksonville.
and Nathan Peterman came in and threw a pick to Jalen Ramsey at the end there. But regular season, 73-41, really good regular season. 5-6 in the playoffs, so not a super strong record there, but he's also number one in the AFC, and number two has to face that Mahomes buzzsaw at some point every year. So like we got to give him a little bit of grace for that. Obviously, no Super Bowl appearances. The furthest run they made was the AFC Championship. And I think the number one thing for me, I have a line bolded for every coach that I have. And for me, it was he sat through and he really helped the greatest rookie to current QB transformation, I think, in NFL history. Now, he's not the offensive guy. He's not the QB coach or the play caller, but he sat through and allowed the bad Josh Allen to work out the mistakes to turn into the monster QB2, QB3 that he is today. And I think that's really, really impressive because for a guy like McDermott to come in your first year, you come from the Panthers where you were an excellent defensive coordinator, right? Uh, I think I think if they were like a assistant coach award or like a coordinator award, he probably would have won a couple there during that stint. But to come there to here or to Buffalo, win your first year, and then you guys trade up for Josh Allen. He's not good his rookie year. The first half of his second year, he's not very good. And it's like, oh, the window in the NFL now is what, 2 or 3 years, then you move on. He's got to have in the back of his mind, maybe this isn't the guy, but he's stuck through it. Josh Allen's a monster now. Scoring offense 4 of 7 years, scoring defense 4 of 7 years. 3 of those were the last 3 seasons. And I think another important thing to note there is that he took over play calling duties this past season, and the defense didn't miss a beat. It was actually really good, despite the injuries to All Pro Matt Milano, to both of their safeties, who have been Pro Bowlers and All Pros in the past couple of years, to Trey White. So, despite all those injuries, when he has to take over play calling and manage the team as a whole, still a good defense. He has one guy on his direct coaching tree, Brian Dable. I know you'll say he's Belichick or whatever guy, but he's directly from McDermott, so
They
I'm
did.
going to count that.
So he comes to Buffalo. He hires Leslie Frazier, Brian Dable, these experienced NFL coaches. Leslie Frazier is kind of cut from the same cloth he was. He was on that Eagles roster. There's a lot of chemistry there. They're familiar with how they operate. Brian Dable, obviously, from a different kind of ideology, and I thought that was good. I think the offense and defense is improved from that. The McDermott does make my top 10. He's 10 for me. I think he's above Dan Campbell because, like you said, comes into a awful franchise. The Bills hadn't
Mm-hmm.
won anything really relevant since the 90s until
And
he
they're
comes in.
real quick too. Their dead cap early in his tenure was horrible. Like
It
their cap
was.
situation was terrible.
And they had a lot of bad signings, and him and Brandon Beane did a huge cleanup. They went and got their guy at quarterback, which is one of the things that has me hesitant about Dan Campbell moving forward is like, hey, we're going to go get our franchise guy. We know we need a superstar if we're going to compete in this league with guys like Tom Brady. Patrick Mahomes obviously hadn't come on the scene yet. They were actually the team that traded their pick and could have had Patrick Mahomes. But that's besides the point. McDermott has done a lot of great things. I'm very curious to see Joe Brady with a full off season. He ran a lot more than Ken Dorsey did, and I think that's a little bit of a concern for me. And I'm curious to see kind of like what happens on the defensive side. You get some of these star playmakers back. You're obviously still in a transition period. Can you get the most out of these guys while you're rebuilding the team? And I think he's going to do it. I think he's got to show that he can get over the hump. It feels like where the Panthers were with the Seahawks back in the early 2010s, where like they would beat us in these close games over and over again in the regular season. Now, granted, I think the Bills have gotten the best of the Chiefs in the regular season in some of these games, but like in those pivotal postseason games, getting past that team, getting past that hurdle. I mean, I think 3 of his playoff losses have come against Andy Reid and Patrick
Hmm.
Mahomes, and it stinks. Like 2 in the divisional round and 2 bangers in the divisional round. I think the championship game they had was actually more of a snooze fest than the other two. And it just goes to show he's right there, but it's that whole teacher facing the student because McDermott was underneath Reid. We talked about McVay beating Zach Taylor in the Super Bowl. Lovie Smith lost to Tony Dungy in the Super Bowl. You have all these like hierarchies of almost like the teacher doesn't lose. Like he saw you evolve. He has helped you on your journey. He knows you almost better than you know you. And I think that's very interesting just from that standpoint that he has to almost stay in Andy Reid's shadow. And it sucks because I think if Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes aren't in the AFC, maybe we talk about the Bills kind of being that team and Josh Allen being like a 2-time Super Bowl champion kind of deal. So have high regards for Sean McDermott. I think he's one of the better head coaches in the NFL. Have him at 10, you have him at 8, but the guy I have at 8 is Nick Sirianni. This guy's been to a Super Bowl. He took Mahomes down to the wire in that game with Jalen Hurts and that team and that roster. And I think the coolest part about it is similar to what Sean McDermott did. It was immediately hit the ground running in year one. And they were going through a period where they were trying to get Wentz off the books. They were in a period where they were trying to transition to Jalen Hurts, and they made it work. And he was a guy that brought in Shane Steichen from the Chargers. He was a guy that brought in Jonathan Gannon. And he obviously tried some experimental stuff hiring in-house this past year to replace those guys. But then he goes out and goes, okay, I'm going to hire Kellen Moore. I'm going to hire Vic Fangio. And they wanted to hire Vic Fangio last year. Just some meddling stuff kind of behind the scenes caused them to, I believe, get fined and then just not be able to hire him. But he's always evolving. He is one of the best in-game decision makers. He's like Mike Tomlin. He's like John Harbaugh in the sense of like delegate to the coordinators, let me manage the team. And I love that about him. He is, I think, the evolution of the Belichick tree, of the Parcells tree, because he coached under guys like Romeo Crennel and I believe Josh McDaniels and some of these guys and learned the Bill Belichick kind of like ideology and way of thinking of getting these one-on-one matchups. That's why he went out and traded for A.J. Brown, a guy that's just going to dominate those one-on-one opportunities and give yourself a big playmaker. And I just love that about him. I think there's a lot to like about him. He hasn't had a losing season in Philadelphia. He's, like I said, he's been to the Super Bowl. He was right on the doorstep of winning. And it just sucks when you go up against the best and your best is just not enough.
Yeah, absolutely fair. I think they made the playoffs every year as well, right? That
Yeah.
first year was the first time that we had the 7th seed. Obviously, they just got destroyed by Brady and the Bucks that game. But second year Super Bowl this past year started off really hot. I think it was a 10-1 start, maybe 10-2. They hit the gauntlet at the end of the year there, where they had to play like the Bills, the Chiefs, the Niners. Really regressed towards the end and flamed out in the playoffs as well. Um, I like what Sirianni's done. Obviously, impressive record and stuff there. But for me, when he was at his best, he had Shane Steichen, who he's not on my list, but he is an honorable mention for me. I've just forgotten to write him. Shane Steichen, one of the most brilliant play callers in our league. Really excited to see what he does with Anthony Richardson in the Colts. And he had Jonathan Gannon, who a lot of Eagles fans are like, oh, boo, this guy sucks. But the grass isn't always greener, right? Both of those guys become head coaches on their own volition and have different first seasons, but I think successful in both of their situations. And then since that comes in, like you said, tries to replace in-house, and it just doesn't go as well as I thought it would. I think in terms of the staff management, he left a lot on the table last year. And when we talk about Super Bowl windows, that first year, I would even say Hurts outplayed Mahomes in that Super Bowl. That Super Bowl was really good, but you're there, and now the Cowboys are fighting for that 1 seed in the division, or yeah, in the division. And then now you have ascendant teams like the Lions, the Packers. It's going to be hard to get back there. I think he was just a year late on bringing in the difference makers there. And for me, it's like when he was on the, or excuse me, when Shane Steichen took over as the play caller, there was a reason he had to take over when Sirianni was the play caller. There wasn't as much creativity. And I think that if he comes back, like if he has to go back to being the play caller, I just don't think they're going to be as successful. Lucky for them, I'm a big Kellen Moore fan, so we should see how that works this year. And for what it's worth, Moore and Fangio should be huge upgrades this season on offense and defense.
And that's all I have with Nick Sirianni. I think he's got some of the accolades. He hasn't skipped a beat since becoming the head coach. I love that about him. I think he's a guy that's like, hey, we can find edges and we can keep finding those edges, and he's very keen on that. He's proven that. I love that about him. At number 9, we have two pretty divisive stuff. I have yet to mention my play caller model yet. Um, but this is an interesting one for it because my play caller model does not like the guy that you have. I'm not the biggest fan of him. I like the fact that he brought in Jim Schwartz this past year. Recognize Joe Woods wasn't the answer. Andrew Barry adds some great talent on that defensive side. And despite a lot of injuries on the offensive side, he wins Coach of the Year. He I like almost wins a playoff game. He makes it to the playoffs, but it's one of those things that I feel like there's a lot left on the bone because we saw Baker perform really well this past year in Tampa Bay under Dave Canales and a passing offense. We didn't see that with the Browns with him as much as I thought we would have. And I think there's a lot left on the bone with even some of the guys that have started for this guy. So you want to take it away? I think I've stolen most of the spotlight here. You're more than welcome to take it away for number 9 and trash my play caller and head coach as much as you want. But I'm not the biggest fan of the guy in Cleveland.
All right, so it is the Cleveland Browns head coach Kevin Stefanski, and I'm just going to read off the numbers at first, and then I'll get into it. All right, 5-5-2 record, 37-30, 1-2 in the playoffs. Made the playoffs multiple times. Out of his 4 seasons, 2 losing seasons there. 0 Super Bowl appearances, obviously. The one playoff win was the one where they just dominated Pittsburgh that year with Baker under center. Baker did have a
Yep,
good year with him that year, so it
he
wasn't
did.
his
It was a
peak with Canales, but that was his last good year before he started the carousel until he found his home in Tampa Bay. Top 10 scoring offense 1 year out of the 4. Top 10 scoring defense 0 years, despite the on paper talent that we talk about all the time. And I do want to agree with you there. Hiring Jim Schwartz was a very shrewd move there. The defense needed it, and I think they were really good this past year. 2-time Coach of the Year as well. But the reason why he's on here over a guy that you have over some of the honorable mentions, I talked about with Dan Campbell, bad situation. We talked about with McDermott, it was a bad situation. We forget that the Browns were like the worst franchise ever. Not in the NFL, in like professional sports until like this happened. Like Baker had gotten 2 coaches fired. We finally get Stefanski. It's like, oh, is he going to get fired now? He stuck it out. 2 of the times he's been there, he's gone to the playoffs. The first time they almost beat the Chiefs, if you remember right. It
they
was
did.
that Daniel Sorensen,
Mahomes went out and
yeah,
Chad
the Chad
Henne's
Henne, and
in,
it was the
and
Sorensen targeting call. Or
mhm.
no, was it targeting or was it the fumble out of the end? I don't remember. But
Well, they didn't. They should have called the targeting, but I think it was
right,
a fumble outside of the back of the end zone. So what should have been a penalty in Brown's ball ended up being
right.
a
It was the same
touchback in
play.
Chiefs'
Yeah, yeah,
ball.
yeah.
Yeah,
So, I mean, we could talk about Mahomes not making the Super Bowl that year, but I think what he's been able to do with not only coming into the worst franchise and making them respectable. This is a team that's made the playoffs. Browns hadn't made the playoffs in what 16? I think it's 15 or 16 years prior to that. 0 and 16, 1-15 season comes in, corrects all that. That aside, their situation is still not good, and he's overcome it. The QB jersey where they have all the names like taped down to the back, it's like taped onto people's legs now because they have so many QBs. That's still going on, and it's despite the fact that Andrew Barry, who you praised a little bit ago, he and the owners went out. Excuse me. It was more so the owners, but they made the deal for Deshaun Watson. They gave up multiple first round picks. I think it was 3, and gave him the fully guaranteed contract, which hampers Stefanski, right? If you're guaranteeing a guy, let's be clear, probably a bottom 12 to 10 QB now, $60+ million a year. That's only going to hurt your roster. And yet, consistently, he has the Browns being competitive, just winning year over year, stuff like that. But getting the most, or not even the most, getting the most out of the team despite having Deshaun Watson as your QB, despite having PJ Walker, who did not have his moments that he did with the Panthers this year with the Browns, and despite having Couch Joe Flacco, who made for a good story.
wow, you're skipping over the UCLA quarterback.
Yeah, Dorian Thompson Robinson. He was not very good this year, but
DTR, no, he
I
wasn't.
still have high hopes for him to be like a high leverage backup. But Couch Joe Flacco, who had played for the Jets, believe it or not, the year before, comes in. he has some really shiny moments, right? He's a gunslinger, he's throwing it down the field, but he's also throwing a ton of picks, right? So like where the flashy wins are coming in, his EPA and stuff is just balanced. Like he's nullifying himself basically. And to win with that and make the playoffs, that's impressive to me. And as far as maybe every coach in the league, like throughout their tenure that's a current head coach, nobody's done it with a worse situation.
I, but again, he comes in because when he comes into the Baker Mayfield situation, you got to remember they drafted Baker Mayfield,
Two
then
years
they won
before.
a couple games. I know, 2 years
Mhm.
before. They do really well. Freddie Kitchens, they fire their coach halfway through the year. Freddie Kitchens kind of comes in. That offense looks like it's humming. They trade for Odell the following year. Freddie Kitchens is the head coach now, and it just all implodes. Why? Because Freddie Kitchens wasn't made to be a head coach. He was a good kind of offensive
Mhm.
coordinator, offensive line guy. He just needed to play his role at that point because he was influential. He did help that offense get to heights.
He helped
Now,
Baker a
obviously, it didn't
lot.
work out. It did. Then you bring in, so Fred, he's fairly familiar with the same system his first 2 years. Then you bring in Kevin Stefanski from Minnesota, and I think the offense he runs is fine. But let's not forget this past year, he still had Amari Cooper, Elijah Moore, David Njoku, some of these other guys. They go out and trade for Jerry Jeudy this year, despite even having all this like cap constraint concerns with Watson. They have plenty of talent on that side of the ball. They have one of the better offensive lines on defense last year. They signed Alvin Tomlinson. They trade for Zadarius Smith to pair with their superstar Myles Garrett. They still have Denzel Ward in the back, decent back seven. And to me, it was more. I feel like he could get a little bit more out of them at times. And he's obviously been in a situation where he has backups playing. But I did a study earlier this year of like quarterbacks of offensive coordinators who had backups, and they had a higher EPA per play with some of these guys, and it's putting them in good situations. And I didn't see him using a lot of easy buttons, trying to use motion with a guy like Elijah Moore, trying to set up different play action looks where you have David Njoku and Amari Cooper coming across the field and giving your quarterback an easy layup throw. I wasn't seeing a lot of that, and that's what concerns me. Is I feel like he has enough talent that if he was creative, he could still put some of these guys in better situations than he has. And so he's obviously won Coach of the Year twice. Ron Rivera won it twice. That's not really impressive to me. I think a lot of people are going, he's doing this with the Browns, and you're absolutely right. It is impressive that he's doing this with a dysfunctional Browns organization, but there's still a lot of talent on this roster, and I don't think that's being talked about enough.
I think right now, yes, there is a lot of talent, but throughout his time there, I would not say that they were one of the most talented teams. In fact, if you look at both of our lists, I'd say maybe the Steelers have less overall talent.
I would
Like,
say the Dolphins
all right, we could
potentially.
say
I
the
understand the
Dolphins too.
speedsters.
But yeah, and also I know you like Elijah Moore, Steve, but like
I do.
we're
I
not
do.
gonna throw him in as a guy. All right, he's a jag. All right, he's just a
Well,
guy.
what I'm saying is, as a third or fourth or
All
even
right,
fifth
that's
option in
okay.
that
Yeah,
offense, like, and that's what I'm saying. Cooper's the main guy. Njoku, you pay. He's taking a step. Obviously, the gruesome knee injury,
yeah.
but before that,
Nick
Nick
Chubb
Chubb was
going
a
out for the year as well.
last year, but before that, he's a phenomenal producer behind one of the better offensive lines. They had Kareem Hunt coming out of that backfield when he still had some gas left in the tank. So
Hmm.
that's where I'm saying is like there were definitely some pieces. And for me, I feel like his creativity could be up a notch. And if it was, I think the offense would look a lot better. I think what he did with Jim Schwartz and then bringing a blitz heavy, just aggressive defense was great, but it bit him in the butt in the wild card when Jim Schwartz couldn't adapt and Bobby Slowick is throwing some of these just like lob passes right behind all these attackers very quick. And it got him a couple touchdowns. It put the game out of reach and it put a lot on the shoulders of Joe Flacco. And he throws a pick six or two, and you're out of the game at that point. So some of those things that if you want to play with some of the contenders this year, you have to clean up some of those things. You have to be better on both sides. And for me, I'm still waiting on that because Kevin Stefanski, while he has been good, he has won 2 winning seasons. It's not like he's hit the scene like a Sean McDermott and Nick Sirianni, where it's almost like no losing seasons. You're just winning, 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 and you're finding a way to do it no matter what.
I think what you're saying is completely fair. My like retort is that he has pulled the worst situation out of this into being a competitive football team.
Yeah,
Just despite not having Mahomes or Stafford or the infrastructure of a Ravens or a Niners or something like that. Like I'm looking at the organization as well. Like apart from the Browns, maybe the Jets are a worse organization. Maybe the Panthers now, but like this, it's not just a bad front office or anything. Like it's a bad team, and I think he's done a good job to bring them out of that. And I think that if maybe if they had a better quarterback, maybe now that they have Judy and Nick Chubb's coming back, maybe they will go on that upward trajectory again. But it will be tough because Burrow's back and that division is stacked. But I don't know. I would rather have him than a lot of the coaches in the league.
That's fair. It's absolutely right. I mean, the guy's won 2 Coach of the Year awards. He's won over a lot of guys. The have guys that want to play for you, coaches that want to coach for you. Like it's all a testament to who Stefanski is. I don't want to take anything away from him. I would probably put him towards like the middle of the pack. I think he'd be right outside my honorable mention list. But the guy I have at 9, a guy that gets a lot of flack for
Much deserved.
much deserved. I'm sure Jacob has a couple of spiels ready for this guy, but I have at number 9 Mike McCarthy. This is a guy that won a Super Bowl in his tenure, not with the Cowboys, but as a coach, he did win a Super Bowl. He's been to several conference championship games with the Packers. He's been on the doorstep with Rodgers, and they just couldn't get over that hump past that 2010 season. Then you look at what he's done with the Cowboys. And I want people to remember not the Cowboys that Cowboys fans want you to remember. The 90s where they win 3 Super Bowls out of 4 years. I'm talking about the Cowboys led by Jason Garrett. The old Bill Parcells when he was kind of coming off kind of the end of his great spurt as an NFL head coach. And when you start looking at those, the teams pretty much a 500 team. They would have a 12-4 season here. They go 8-8. Sometimes they go 4-12. That's how they got Ezekiel Elliott, and they were lucky to pair Prescott with that. But when we look at the past 3 years, and McCarthy's been there for 4 years, but the first year, I believe Prescott got injured. That was a gruesome knee injury. They go 6-10. It's not an abysmal season. It's definitely one of those where it's like, we could have been better. Reels off 3 consecutive 12-win seasons. That's not easy to do. This goes back to that whole Matt LaFleur winning 13 games, and obviously he has Rodgers a part of that. But Dak Prescott, I don't think I know I argued for him as a top 5 quarterback now over the next 2 years, but prior to McCarthy taking over, I think a lot of people thought he was a fringe top 10 quarterback. And he's been able to, and I understand the Jones are a part of the drafting process. You've been able to add guys like CeeDee Lamb, Tyler Smith, Micah Parsons. You've had guys like Deron Bland and Trayvon Diggs on that back end on the defense. He's brought in guys like Dan Quinn. He retained Kellen Moore. He has Marty Schottenheimer's son, Brian Schottenheimer, on his roster, who's been an offensive coordinator in the league. This is a guy that's built a solid coaching staff, hires Mike Zimmer this past year. And I think some of it has to do with luck, and some of it has to do with he's got to figure out how to stop Shanahan defenses with Mike Zimmer this offseason. Because if they can make those games competitive, they can find answers on the offensive side while stopping some of these Shanahan-style offenses with their defense. I think they have a chance to make a playoff push because the talent is there. Will they do it? I don't know. And this is where you can go on your rant about Mike McCarthy, but I feel like he is getting them to that doorstep where they are competitive. They are being talked about in Super Bowl contention conversations. I think they're legitimate. This isn't Stephen A. Smith on First Take just bashing the Cowboys over the past 10 years where it's like, they didn't make it because they're the Cowboys. This is a team that's really, really good, and they're really, really close.
Before last season, I think when it was the NFC East division review, I think my take was that the Cowboys had the most talented roster in football. I think it was around that time. I still believe that. I think that their roster might be top 3 to 5 now
It's
in
top
talent.
5, yeah.
Yeah. This is what McCarthy's done since he's been out. He's gone up and it's just been flat, right? 12-5, 3 straight seasons is very impressive. Do not get me wrong. A lot of coaches can't do that. A lot of coaches will never do that. But when it comes to McCarthy, and I am going to go back a little bit to the Green Bay days, he obviously has that early success with Prime Rodgers, but then you have Prime Rodgers and you can't even make it back. And so this isn't Sean Payton where he retired. He got fired. All right. He stepped down. He got fired. And he took some time at the PFF warehouse or whatever he said in the offseason, comes back, obviously has the Cowboys humming in the regular season, but then we get to the playoffs and it's just, it is rough. We get 2 Niners games. I'm going over the losses. We get the first one where I think it was the clock ran out, right? Dak didn't know he had to hand the ball to the ref or something. So we can't fully put that on McCarthy, I guess. We kind of can because they got blasted early in that game. The second one, I guess we can put it on Kellen Moore, the Zeke handoff. Zeke is the center and he hands it off. That was just funky and like it was like a last play. So like if you're going for one more play and you want to bring out a trick play, so be it, right? Like the odds of you winning are just
But but before you get to the shellacking, we're talking about the 49ers in back-to-back times. And
yes,
when the 49ers do well, the Cowboys don't do well. And that's like, again, like they have to fix that this offseason because the talent's there. You're getting beat up by schemes that you're
right.
just not like
And this is
accounting
with
for.
like the best defense over the past couple of years as well, like takeaways, scoring defense, stuff like that.
Yeah,
I do think Zimmer is a better schematic fit than Dan Quinn is, but we can't deny how good the defense was under Dan Quinn
it was.
in the regular season at least.
But
And
they
then
play a lot of nickel packages, and when
mhm,
you go up against these Shanahan offenses, they like running 21 personnel or even 12 personnel in the case of the Packers. And the teams we're talking about, they get bigger, they show threat of run, you have to stack the box, and then all of a sudden there's chaos on the back end because they have guys sneaking out and wide open. And go ahead. I mean,
and
roast them for what happened with the
well,
Packers, but it's one of those things.
and I think them losing like a bigger corner and Stephon Gilmore is going to play a part in that this season. I think they are going to have to get like a guy on the back end that can man up with some of those tight ends. But yeah, this past season, talking about LaFleur and Jordan Love, we mentioned them earlier. They just destroyed the Cowboys in AT&T Stadium. I believe the other two times, or at least one of them was in San Francisco. I don't remember where the second one was. But this was in AT&T Stadium. It was a wild card game. I think everybody just penciled in the Cowboys to win. They just get blasted. And so I think number one, because this exercise is like the next 2 years going forward, number one, he hasn't been extended. He's on the last year of his deal. So obviously, not even the front office has full faith on him. Number two, neither is Dak. We talked about how Dak is unrestricted free agent, no tag, no trade clause. So if they don't work it out with him now, he's gone too. So let's say that they do retain McCarthy, but Jerry Jones is cheap and doesn't decide to pay Dak. Even going forward, there can he continue what he's done with a new quarterback? I don't know, but for me, McCarthy,
Maybe they go the route where they extend Trey Lance and they do a little Jordan Love experiment
yeah.
from that standpoint. We you never know.
Well, yeah, like Trey Lance might stick around, like Jordan Lover, even Sam Darnold has managed to stick around for this. I don't know how he's managed to stick around for this long, but he's still in the league. But my thing is no no evolution really over the past couple of years. Even that 12-5 is a really good place, but it is a plateau for him.
What he's done with CeeDee Lamb in terms of the one-on-one matchups, I think is very comparable to what we saw with Rodgers and Devontae Adams, Tom Brady and Gronkowski. When you have that like true one like superstar and you're able to feed him the ball, McCarthy's been able to do that, and a lot of that has timing to do with at certain point you stop your drop back and then boom, ball's out and you get the ball to your playmaker and they make a play. And so I think we're going to continue seeing more of that. We also saw McCarthy start to steal ideas from across the NFL and evolve the Cowboys offense last year. So while he may not be a guy that's evolving NFL offenses, he is still adapting with the NFL times. And we saw that in the back half of last year.
I think that's fair. I also think that when you have CeeDee Lamb, who I put as my second receiver on the skill players chart, I think you just have to force feed him. And the way
You
I'll say
do.
the way he was able to do it is creative, but I think a guy that good lends to himself gaining all those targets and stuff
But
like
who is
that.
a part of, and I understand
No,
the
no, no. Like,
Jones
he
are kind
calls
of
the
the
plays and
general
stuff.
managers. I'm saying even evaluating CeeDee Lamb and drafting him and like bringing him in the building. This is again a guy that has had a vision for this offense and it's starting to unfold. And I like what I'm seeing. Like they've done a good job replacing people on the offensive line. If they're able to continue doing that with some of the guys that they drafted this year, like again, I don't think that they're going to skip as much a beat. It's a matter of can you stop Shanahan offenses and can you get out of your own way when you're playing those defenses?
That's fair. And I think that's another good point that you bring up. It's not just stopping their offenses because, in the sake of the two Niners games, it's not like the Niners put up 30 and 40 on them. It's
No.
a lot of just boneheaded mistakes by McCarthy and by Dak as well. Dak has had a couple choke moments in the playoffs as well. And then last year, the Packers notoriously had a really bad defense. They just weren't able to capitalize on that. But for McCarthy, excuse me, I just got to see that end of season growth and like them pushing through in the playoffs. Beating the Giants by 40 during the regular season is cool and all,
Yeah.
but when you're getting beat, not by 40, but when you're getting 40 hung on you in your home stadium in the playoffs, it's like you got to see more. And I think the goalpost is the last thing I'll say. I think the goalpost is a little bit different because it is the Cowboys, because it is this big storied franchise. 12-5 for most teams would get you security, but when you are 12-5 and don't show up at the end, I think that's where the scrutiny lies from fan bases or from fans and from internally from the front office, as they have yet to extend him as we're
If
recording
you
this.
want to, like, in essence, like, secure that next contract in the case of Mike McCarthy here, you have to get to the conference championship. I don't think a
Yeah,
divisional round cuts it this year. I think that pressure has to be on. He's obviously gotten to that game several times with the Packers. If he can get there with the Cowboys, I don't think it cements his legacy, but I think it really does put him in that conversation as a top 10 coach. That you're able to win consistently, you do finally break through, you make a playoff push. I don't think it's Super Bowl or bust necessarily. I would say would be that if they decide to, like, get that far in the playoffs and then keep Mike McCarthy and Dak Prescott, that okay, now it is Super Bowl or bust. We are all in with you guys. You got to make it work. But I think at this year, it's like if you guys can't, if we're just plateauing, then we're just going to start from the ground up and go from there. So
for sure.
that kind of wraps up our top 10. At number 10, I have Sean McDermott. You have Mike McDaniel. I'll highlight a couple of my honorable mentions. I've already talked about Dan Campbell being on this list. You mentioned Shane Steichen being on yours. I should have had him on mine. I put him in the same boat that I have D'Amico Ryans, who I have on
Hmm.
my honorable mention list. We've only seen 1 year out of these guys. It was impressive what we saw. I want to see more of it. I want to see if they can kind of keep up and keep evolving their schemes. And if they go through periods of transition, how are they able to adapt to those? Doug Peterson, I feel like he's in the Kevin Stefanski boat where it's like he has a lot of highs, but he also has some lows. And I think his high being a Super Bowl victory lends himself to being in a different conversation than Kevin Stefanski, especially when he did that with Nick Foles as the quarterback. Like some of that is a little insane in terms of like a Super Bowl run and beating Tom Brady and Bill Belichick in the Super Bowl is pretty crazy. So the fact he's not on this list is kind of, I wouldn't say concerning, but he's a guy that I think next year could put himself in that conversation if he turns the Jaguars around. Um, Last guy for me, Sean Payton. Guy won a Super Bowl with the Saints. He's a really, really good head coach. Proved that in New Orleans. I think what he's doing in Denver is interesting, but it's like one of those situations where he has so many quarterbacks right now on the roster. And when you have like two or three starting quarterbacks, you don't have any starting quarterback. And so that's my concern is Zach Wilson has not shown anything. You bring in a very old Bo Nix from like a rookie standpoint. Like, yes, you get the benefit from the contract, but he is a older, more developed player to where you kind of already know what you have. And so it's like, what's going to happen from there? I don't know. But I do like what they did last year. It looked like they were a lot more competitive than they were with Nathaniel Hackett the year before, and you hope they can build on that.
Yeah, for sure. Steichen and D'Amico Ryans are a good start, but not enough of a body of work for me to put them on this list. Like if they were 2 years, like if they had done this for
Mm-hmm.
2 years, I probably have them over Mike McDaniel. Sean,
Interesting.
I mean, D'Amico Ryans, they won a playoff game in his first year. So
They
like
did.
yeah, like it's hard for me to leave that off. Sean Payton, he did this like he was out for I think it was 1 or 2. I don't remember if it was 1 or 2 years.
Yeah.
Came back, obviously iffy year last year, but that was also Russ who isn't at his best. We need to see if he can do what he's been able to do consistently without a Drew Brees, without a top 10 to 15 QB ever. So we'll see there. Also, he's a scumbag for the Bounty Gate stuff. And then I
Oh,
had
absolutely. Yeah. I'm not
yeah
talking Sean Payton, the person. I'm talking
yeah
Sean Payton, the head coach.
And then I also had Jim Harbaugh. He's also been out of the NFL game for a while. Obviously, at the highest level of college, turned Michigan around from the Rich Rodriguez days. They were just horrible, not a horrible history, but bad program at the time. Turned them around, won a national championship, beat Alabama in the Rose Bowl, beat Washington in the national championship. But in the NFL, he's one of the best head coaches to ever do it. He has a .695 regular season winning percentage. If we stack that against all the coaches that we talked about today, only Andy Reid's time with the Chiefs is higher. So really good, like proven winner there. But he's also like it's his way or the highway, right? So we're gonna have to see how that works out with the Chargers. Even though he has good infrastructure in place, I think strong offensive line and a like we hope franchise QB and Herbert. Like he's obviously has the talent, but we haven't seen the deep playoff runs or anything like that. But those are my honorable mentions as well. And I think we're in Purrfect Takes territory, unless you have anything else to add to Jim Harbaugh.
I'm trying to remember the last time we pushed 2 hours on a podcast.
I don't know,
We
but it
only
was
had
good.
we only had one interruption. I thought my Wi-Fi would crash at least 2 or 3 times during this, so I'm glad it only happened once. We are in a position now, like you said, where we're talking about perfect takes. We want to keep it more coach oriented. And I'll just throw mine out there. I've been high on him. He's the reason why he's the number 2 head coach for me on my offensive play caller rankings that I have a PCA model developed around. He ranked second last year. I think this year he's going to take a step. I think they're going to be able to really build upon what they did last year. And Matt LaFleur is going to lead the Packers to a Super Bowl appearance. I think they're going to be that sneaky dark horse team. I think some of the true powerhouses, we have questions about the Eagles. We just talked about our concerns with the Cowboys. I think the 49ers are a few injuries away from kind of slipping out of that main hold. And we could honestly see a Lions Packers NFC Championship game, which would be wild. And I'm here for it. I think he'll have enough to get over the hump. Now, I don't know if he'll be able to beat the AFC team, but I do think he'll make a Super Bowl appearance.
I like that one. It's a lot more like honed in version of my perfect take. Mine's a bit more broad. Currently, we have 7 head coaches. I forgot to write in Doug Peterson here, but 7 head coaches that have won a Super Bowl with them being the head coach. Tomlin, way back then. Sean Payton, way back then. McCarthy, way back then. Obviously, those two are with different teams. John Harbaugh was next. Then we had Doug Peterson with the Eagles. Now he's with the Jags. Andy Reid's won a handful now, and McVay. So my take is we're going to see a new head coach added to the list of current head coaches with the Super Bowl win. I like the Matt LaFleur being one of them. Like I said, I think Dan Campbell and the Lions have a really good chance. I like their roster there. And then Shanahan's like scheme and offense, you can never really count it out. I know last year we talked about the AFC as this like super massive gauntlet and stuff, but I think the NFC is evening the odds a little bit with like younger teams and really talented teams. So it's going to be interesting rather to see who wins. We could also see the Bengals come on if Burrow is able to stay healthy. So who knows there? But new head coach, Super Bowl winner is my take this year.
I like it. And that about does it for this week's episode. We spent a good over an hour and a half just talking about head coaches. A lot of good content from winning records to their impact on the team, who they've brought in, their history, their accomplishments, their accolades. Definitely give us a follow, a like, a subscribe on Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. Next week, we're going to talk about like front offices and the general managers. I expect that to be a very lengthy conversation as well. Got some stuff in the works with trade evaluation, had a draft evaluation paper a couple months ago that I published. And it's going to be a lot of good content. I think there's going to be a lot of good points. These are hard things to quantify when they aren't the players on the field, and you have to judge them from a more full body of work. Judge it by the forest, not so much the trees within that forest. And I think that's about it for this week. After that, we'll start our division reviews before the season. We have some good guests lined up, so that should be really, really exciting here in the coming weeks. I'm hoping next week we maybe get a visual of all the people. We're still waiting on some confirmations, but get you guys hype about kind of the breakdown and expectations that we should see this fall. So without further ado, we'll catch you guys next time.